asking questions is the most important thing a leader can do. People think it's about issuing orders and directing people, but to influence people, it's about listening to them, helping them come to the answer, figuring out their black swan is, right? Why they think what they do. And then you can sort of shape things.
Welcome to the Philanthropy Masterminds podcast, brought to you by DonorSearch, the show that takes you inside the lives of thought leaders, innovators, and changemakers in fundraising, philanthropy, and civil society. I'm your host, Jay Frost. Today, we speak with Chris Miano, founder and CEO of MemoryFox, the software platform that aims to help nonprofits raise funds and stand out on social media by leveraging grassroots content. We learn about Chris's journey from Buffalo to Army platoon leader and company commander in Iraq and Afghanistan, and then back home again, and the stories he heard in the field and at home that fueled his passion to make authentic life stories available and accessible at last. The way you talked about how you came to do the work that you're doing now, I suppose there are a number of origin stories that you tell.
Yeah, right.
To help understand this, to help others understand this. But that you talked about your grandfather and his being in the service in the Second World War in the Navy,
right?
And the idea of capturing his stories or preserving his stories or honoring those stories, whatever they were, and it's really it seems like there's a fair amount of narrative that has been written about subsequent conflicts, but a lot of the writing, at least that I've seen about that time, comes from third parties. It comes from historians or other biographers, and all of that's terrific. But some of those stories were lost. Did you know your grandfather well?
I really didn't. He died when I want to say I was like 19, 18. And at that time, you're so focused on your own life as a kid. You really don't have an appreciation for how big the world is and how much is out there and not enough of a healthy respect for tradition and, the people that came before you that shape who you are. And so, I didn't take the time, and I always regret that I didn't spend more time with him hearing his stories. And so now these things just sort of exist through pictures and through secondhand information. And really, it's one of my biggest regrets is that I didn't spend that time. But that's youth, right? I mean, that's just the circle of life is when you're 17 and, if I may, you're full of piss and vinegar. You want to take over the world. You think you can do anything. And you think that you exist in a vacuum and you don't appreciate not just what culturally your family shares and passes down to you, but also the genes, the very fabric of your DNA is passed down from them. Your insecurities, your fears, your whatever, right? A lot of the makeup of who you are is shaped by the people that came before you. And so if you don't look back at them and you don't understand who they are, you'll never truly know yourself and grow and overcome the challenges that come before you. And so that's a big part of self-awareness, right? And you have to look back, you have to look backward and be vulnerable and understand that there are things that you don't control that came to you through the people that came before you. And that can be hard for people. Ego is a tough thing. And you think you can take on anything. But I think if you look backwards, you can learn a lot about yourself, and that can help shape how you act in the future.
It's interesting because when your grandfather went into the war, however, I don't know if you know how he joined the Navy, if it was through the draft or what it was, but he was also probably about that age. So he didn't have a narrative or a whole set of questions to ask the people who came before him, and they certainly no one had experienced anything quite like that war. So he was in the same position you would have been in when you were thinking about him. But he must have made a big impression on you anyway. What was your impression of this person in the family, even if you didn't ask him a ton of questions, about his relationship, for example, to service?
Yeah. Honestly, and this is something that I carry from him, is his humor, his irreverence. And I think, everybody comes into the military as something, and then they come out of it as something different. And maybe he was always like that. And I think it seems like he always was. But there's something about, I was trying to explain this to my wife the other day, is because I am very irreverent and I always make jokes. Even during stressful times, I find a way to make jokes. And, I think when you are thrust into these conflicts and you see, maybe the depravity is not the word I want to use, but just the evil side of the human condition. And this conflict is made of all just normal people who just want to live their lives, but you're brought into this thing. And some people, they become something different, but I have always used humor. I remember one time in Iraq, one of our vehicles got blown up. And it was pretty severe, but it was a really strong vehicle called an MRAP. And they're designed to withstand, pretty serious explosions. And so, we recovered the vehicle. We got everybody out of there. Everybody was okay, some slight concussions. But we were laughing. That's all we could do. We were waiting for the recovery vehicles to come get us. And, there were some other things that happened that were kind of scary, but we were laughing. And I remember that moment thinking, wow, we are laughing right now. And, and I think I get that from that, but also from my grandfather, is he just had this irreverence for life. He served a different God when it came to the idea. He liked to drink. He liked to have a good time, and I think I get a little bit of that for him. I'm usually the one having a late conversation with somebody, not wanting to go to bed. I'm always saying, it's time to go to bed. I'm like, we're just finishing this conversation. Just one more drink and we're just hanging out. But I think I get that from him, which is interesting, is that irreverence sort of transfers through. And I think, long-winded way of explaining that, but I think it's really neat how that happens. And I think if you look backwards at those people, you can see the things that they carried and the things that they passed on to you. And it really teaches you a lot.
Yeah. Different ways of surviving and enjoying what you've got while you've got it.
You have to know that stuff. That's your survival. Like if you are not aware of who you are and what your makeup is, you're going to have a really tough time. And you probably know people like that. We all know people like that are so blocked up that they can't find their way out of it. And there's ways to do that, therapy and things like that, or just having good friends that you can talk through. But not everybody has that or the ability to do that. So,
not everybody stays up late telling stories, which is another way to kind of cope.
That's the fun. You get the Army buddies together, your old high school friends or new friends, new dads that you meet. That's part of it too.
Now, you're from a Buffalo family, right?
Yeah. And Buffalo is a really interesting place because it's a very old place. And it's a very, the people there are very irreverent. And I think there's a lot that goes into that culturally. It used to be one of the crown jewels of the country way back in the early 1900s. And then, it became part of the Rust Belt. And, and I think there's a little bit of the Buffalo Bills in us where they lose 4 Super Bowls. And so there's just everybody in that darn city has a chip on their shoulder about one thing or another. And it flows in the rivers. And, but it's shaped who I am. Even in the Army, people used to be like, man, you got a real chip on your shoulder. So, that's just kind of who I am. And it helps shape who I am. But you also, you have to be aware of it and not let it take over your identity.
So does this go way back? Is your whole family full of irreverent Buffalonians or what?
Oh yeah. We have a lot of fun, and it's funny. I was watching some home videos of myself. Every dad back in the early 80s would try to get their hands on a video camera. Of course, those were the cool things. And I think we borrowed one. And there's this video of me getting off the bus and I'm in this like Buffalo Sabres t-shirt that is down to my knees. And of course, I'm just like kicking rocks and things like that. I'm like, I'm still kind of that. My wife goes, "You're still kind of that guy." You just got a real chip on your shoulder about things sometimes. And you just, you want to do it your way. You want to do it your way. And I think that's kind of fun, though.
Well, so what about the storytelling piece? So sometimes when a person is from a place, that place is either, kind of onto itself. It kind of holds back. In other places, people just let it ride. They tell stories, and that's a part of the fabric of the culture. Is the storytelling piece of your life, did that start also early in your life? Is that part of your family and your place?
It really grew over time. I mean, we're, an Italian family, so there's a lot of always storytelling going on, and half of which is true. And then you go into the Army, which is, of course, a storytelling organization. Whether people are talking about the stories of how they grew up or sharing stories is how you build rapport. It's part of the human existence, right? And especially when you go to places like Iraq and Afghanistan, you think Americans are storytellers. I mean, these are ancient civilizations that have stories. They don't go back 300 years. They go back thousands of years, right? And so every part of my life storytelling has been a piece of it. But I always like to, and this is something that always fascinates me. And I'm new to the nonprofit world, 3 years now, right? We've been doing this for a little bit now. But, one thing that I see is we think of storytelling as we try to tell nonprofits to tell stories that are what I call Star Wars stories, which are a rise and a fall and a climb. They're not right. Like we're trying to make a new Harry Potter or something like that. And I think social media kind of like tries to pull you in that direction. And it's sort of the tail wagging the dog in the sense of like, well, we need this. And nonprofits have this impossible task, right? Is to try to tell Star Wars stories and about people that have very complicated lives and very complicated problems. And there is no resolution a lot of times, right? A lot of times, if you're a fundraiser or you are a program manager or whatever, a volunteer, you're like Sisyphus pushing a rock up the mountain, and that there's no end to it, right? There's no bow tie. There's no, Darth Vader doesn't get it in the end, and then there's a resolution, and it's just not the way the real world works, right? And so what I try to think of storytelling, and I learned this in the military too, and like throughout life, is like storytelling is more like Bruce Springsteen stories. It's snippets, it's pictures on an album, it's pieces that tell a bigger story, a theme.
Yeah.
Right. And so a lot of nonprofits, I think they spend a lot of time trying to get that perfect story from the person who's coming to a food bank. Right. I mean, let's face it. Right. That person, may have a lot of reasons why they're there. And those reasons don't go away just because they got fed.
It's not all.
They might go to that food bank the rest of their life, right? They may always be relying on this service. So there's no resolution. This is just living. And life is messy and complicated. And that's why I think we really need to appreciate and love nonprofits and not make them give them these impossible tasks of telling Star Wars stories, and just think of it more as, hey, we're just talking about our mission in action, right? We're telling the stories about our mission, but not Star Wars stories, that's my mission, I feel like, is to try to inspire and try to, make nonprofits feel comfortable with the stories that they feel like they need to tell, not the stories that social media and people want them to tell, like I said, the tail wagging the dog.
Sure. Well, you just touched on something that I think a lot of people like myself who have not been in the service don't know, which is that you go into a place like the Army, and generations of my family were in the Army, but I was not. And that's where the stories are told. And people may or may not come back and then be able to relate those stories. So we'll get to that part next, because that's something that you did through the Memory Fox and you do now with nonprofits in general. But the idea that you get together with a bunch of guys who have never met or have only spent a little basic training together, or whatever the way the entry point is, like you were at Fort Sill where my mother was born and raised. So this is a different kind of environment.
Oklahoma.
What is it like in terms of that storytelling? Is it really everybody getting together and just, kind of feeling each other out and feeling safe and developing that trust? How does that storytelling environment develop?
It's moments. It's moments. It's not, there's nothing sit around in a circle and everybody tells their story, pass the ball, icebreakers, things like that. It's more organic. You're out at your combat outpost, everybody's asleep, you're smoking a cigar, and a soldier comes walking up and, you offer him a cigar and you chat, you chat about their life, where they came from. It's more intimate like that, I think. Mm-hmm. And there's a beauty in that. And what's so interesting about the military, which I think it's such a fascinating career, or something you do for 8 years. I was in for 8 years. Mm-hmm. People from all walks of life. I had soldiers from, South Chicago. He had a gun charge, and he got out of his gun charge by going in the military. And here I am from, I'm a pretty straight-laced kid from Buffalo, from a middle-class family, got good grades and everything. And then you're thrown into this. I had soldiers from Compton, from South Bronx, from Connecticut, like every walk of life, and you're thrust together, and everybody's green. Is the concept, is everybody's green. And I will tell you that one of the things, the biggest challenges that I had when I got out, was that no longer is the case. And you move back to a place like Buffalo, which I love Buffalo, up, down, left, and right. But there were a lot of unfortunate decisions that were made in terms of the landscape of the city. For example, a highway going right through the city that separated the white part and the black part. Right. And those battle lines were drawn, during the 70s. And so you come back here and you go out and you're hanging out, in the city, and there's white side, there's black side, there's the Hispanic side, and it's very segregated. And that was a weird change for me, is there is not as much osmosis that happens between races in a place that's that segregated. Whereas in the military, it would be like, tell me about it. Oh, and I had one soldier tell me he saw his first dead body when he was 4 years old. It was not to be glib about it, but it was a prostitute in a burned out car in a field. And this kid, he was 4 years old. And think about how that shapes the rest of your life in terms of how you view the sanctity of life and just the things that, the way that you just feel about things. And, I don't want to make that didn't define his life, but certainly you don't forget that moment. Right. And I grew up in a not wealthy, but certainly a middle-class neighborhood. I never experienced anything like that. But if you're empathetic and you really listen to people's stories, you learn about that and you elevate them. Right now, you're connected forever, because you shared a story with somebody, and now your lives are forever, and now you're part of each other's story. And I find that so fascinating.
It sounds like a big part of that is the listening to the story, not just the telling of it.
Yeah, and I think one thing I have learned a lot, I read this book called Just Listen, and unfortunately I read it too late in life. And now I'm like triggered by it. When you've been there, right? In a group of people, and there's one person that every time everybody says something, they have to relate it back to themselves. And it makes me crazy, right? Because I'm hypersensitive to it. Is the idea of listening to, but really listening to people, not just immediately taking it back to yourself and seeing how it informs you, but asking questions and really diving deep into it. And I think you can influence, like leadership is about that too. And you learn that in the military. I didn't know it, that I was doing it, but I did it. Asking questions is the most important thing a leader can do. is you don't, people think it's about issuing orders and directing people. And certainly that's a big piece of it, right? But to influence people, it is not about telling people what to do. It's about listening to them, helping them come to the answer, figuring out what their black swan is, right? What the thing is that's hiding out there why they think what they do. And then you can sort of shape things. If people spend a lot more time listening, I think we'd be better off, right?
Right. Well, right. But it also sounds like you were in this singular environment to be able to ask good questions of people who have very different experiences from your own. So they had an invitation to tell a story maybe they hadn't told before.
Yeah. And one of my greatest, you come out of the military and you have a lot of regrets, unfortunately, and they keep you up at night sometimes. But one of the surprising ones that I didn't expect that I would have is that I wish that I had spent more time with the problem soldiers. So I was a commander, right? And so I was in charge of 110 guys, and we were combat arms. So it was before, there was integration between the sexes in the combat arms. And if I had just spent more time with them, I feel like, and really listened to why they were having challenges, or they're just so busy, right? But, is listening to them and really understanding why, so that you could elevate them. I don't know what made me trigger to say that, but I think that this just came to my mind is I wish that I had spent more time listening. I think learning and listening, I think it's such an important piece to it. And I wish that I had done more of it.
You said something about the people in the countries themselves where you were stationed, and you were in a number of places. So for those who don't know, can you kind of just quickly go through a litany, because you've traveled quite a bit?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, right? You come from Buffalo, New York, and I'm Italian, and I'm a little bombastic, and I used to like to argue, and, I'm just like very East Coast, and then you go to the military, which is actually very Southern, as a culture in a lot of ways. And so there's just a different culture about it. So I go to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, right? Which you said in Lawton, Oklahoma, you're trying to meet people, right? You try to meet locals. And I'm just like such a different vibe from most people. And so you go there, and then I go to Germany, which was really cool, but another huge cultural shift, a place like Germany where people are, I'll never forget sitting in a restaurant and I'm eating by myself, just drinking a coffee or something like that. People are staring at me, like a very different cultural thing. It's okay to stare. Whereas in America, somebody stares at you, you think they want to, you think there's a big problem. And also you'll sit at a coffee shop. Someone will sit across from you at your table, and that's just normal. And so you have all these like cultural learnings that sort of happen. And then you go to Iraq, right? So at first I deployed to Iraq from Germany, and I'm this, very naive, of course, lieutenant, right? That's the classic story, is the lieutenant who's going to save the world. And I can't say that the cliche was wrong for me, unfortunately, but it comes from a good place, right? And so I'm on one of my first combat patrols, and it's exhilarating. It's really interesting experience to be there. And we go to this little oasis village that's about 45 minutes away from our combat outpost. And, we're rolling up on it, and you can see the palm trees. And as you get closer, you realize this village is completely destroyed, rubble. And you start rolling in, and then we start seeing craters everywhere throughout the village. And there's a Sons of Iraq checkpoint. The U.S. government, Petraeus, had this plan to hire young Iraqis who there's a problem with joblessness there. And so hire them to maintain checkpoints throughout the area. And we come upon this checkpoint, and I'm like, man, this is crazy. What happened here? And they're explaining what happened. And I look over, and there's this guy who's there, and he's created, it's kind of hard to explain, but he's created this little like tent city for himself. And he was hanging like laundry and things like that, had all these cups out to catch water and things. And I'm like, who's that guy? So that guy, he has been here since this village was destroyed. He's the only person who's still here. This little town called Cazalia was the name of it.
Wow.
And so I'm like, can I go talk to him? Is he friendly? He's, oh yeah, you go talk to him. And so here I am, this dumb, naive lieutenant from Buffalo, New York, who's never really had major problems in his life. And I go over there and I'm like, what are you, through an interpreter, of course, what are you doing here? This village is destroyed, I guess, like a year ago, and you're still here. And he said, walk with me. And we're walking through the village, dodging craters as we go. And he said, this used to be a beautiful place. When I was a child, a French couple came and they took their honeymoon here. And we were shocked. We couldn't believe that some French couple would come all the way from France to our little village. And they spent a whole week there. And they would walk through the town, and he points out to the streets, and he said they were walking right there. And they would break bread with us and drink tea. And they stayed in this little place here, and he's walking through this little village. And he said, if I leave, it's like that never happened. The story of this village is dead. And I was like, I get chills even talking about it, right? And I felt so inspired by that. And I'm thinking, here we are, we're Americans, we come here, we're trying to tell them how, we're doing the best that we can, right? With the resources that we have. We were good faith. And I'm thinking, well, what can we do? Here we are, we came all this way, let's do some good. And, but there's a lot that goes into that. So I took that story, right? That is a story that he told me. And then I took that story, and then I went and told my commander back at the Fort operating base, who he hadn't been there yet. And he was inspired by it. And then he told his commander, who was inspired by that. And that transfer of that story went through 3 people. And it encouraged us to focus resources on that village. And, it came a long way. It was a long journey. By the time we left, we'd set up some irrigation there. The foundations were starting to get I don't know unfortunately, I don't know what condition it's in. I can't just look on Google Maps, unfortunately. So who knows what it's in, but the idea of it is that story was able to be retold 3 times and still have the power to influence somebody. And we allocated resources because of that story. And I feel like that's such a North Star for the way that I think about storytelling. And you'll notice he didn't tell me a Star Wars story. There was no resolution. There was no rise and fall. It was just a snippet in time that was memorable, and that I was able to easily transfer to other people. And that informs the way that we've built the software that we have, is this idea of a story is a series of snippets of moments in time over time. And there's so many different ways to tell it that are memorable and create action, right? And inspire. And, that's always been my North Star is thinking about that and trying to help nonprofits be able to accomplish that same thing.
One of the key parts of that is being open to the story, going over and seeking it like you did with the gentleman. But another part is drawing it out. And that's something that it sounds like that was easy to do in that case. He had a story to tell, and he was willing to tell it, and he was willing to tell it to you. That wasn't always the case, I'm sure, during your service everywhere you went. Yeah. But as you said earlier, you're in places where people have stories that go way back, sometimes thousands of years. And so as you've gone through this experience in the service and now with all the storytelling work you've done, which we'll talk more about in a second, do you find there's some keys to helping people to peel back the layers of the onion and tell their stories, even when they're reluctant, not to manipulate them to do so, but to give them the oxygen, the space, and the interest that they're willing to dig deep and tell those stories?
I think a lot about this, and I wish I had a great answer, but I just have some ways that I think about it. Really, it's just one, it's this idea of authenticity. Is when okay, let's say you're somebody who goes to a food bank for whatever reason, right? And we work with a lot of food banks at Memory Fox. And the number one story they always want to collect is from the visitors, from the clients. Right. And that's the hardest. When I tell you the hardest story there is to collect, it's that one. And so we have this conversation, right?
And why is that?
Well, because I think, people are proud. People are proud. And among other things, right? There's a lot of reasons why people go to food banks or need those things, need certain services. But people are proud, right? And they don't like to necessarily talk about their deficiencies. And that's not, you know what I mean? Like, you may have, you maybe come to a point where you feel comfortable with those things. I have learned to feel comfortable about my flaws, right? But not everybody, like we talked about earlier, right? A lot of people have blockages, and that is not just people who come to food banks. That is people who run companies. That is people who are teachers. That is everybody, right? It's a human condition. So what I find is it is about authenticity of it. When you are collecting a story from somebody or asking, you need to be truly authentic about what the purpose is and not exploitative about the story itself. You can pitch it, you say, this is for a fundraising campaign but I think a lot of times there's what is it? So I have this idea of and I never really have fleshed it out, and you maybe know more about it, but some people are tourists in other people's misfortune, and they just live in it, right? And they just can't get enough of it. And they didn't experience these things, but they have this need to be a part of it and have those things in their lives. And so they're perpetual tourists in other people's misfortune. And I think, humans can spot that a mile away. And so if you're not authentic about and present in your own mind of why you need this story, if you're flippant about it and you say, well, we need to get this story because, the executive director needs this, or the board I got to go collect from these people, you know what I mean? And I don't want to say that a lot of people are like that, but of course, some people are like that, right? And maybe unconsciously they're like that. And so don't be a tourist. Really, truly love the person authentically, and it will create that space. That's the way and that's with veterans too. If you're just trying to be a tourist in their experiences so that you can be entertained by a cool story, that's whatever, right? You know what I mean? You might get a story, but a lot of times people could sniff that out. And at a broader level, and a broader level, that's what social, and I get, it's so funny. I have this company that is helping nonprofits share stories with donors and on social media, right? But I hate social media. I despise it with every bone in my body because it's profit driven, and it is manufactured authenticity to pull content. And so people are always arguing or they're fighting. That's what social media sells is that's the content. You know what I mean? And so there's something antithesis to it. Is this idea of social media wants it wants interaction. It doesn't care what that interaction is.
As long as the temperature's up. Yeah.
As long as the temperature's up, right? And it's created and they've driven us completely insane. And so my hope is that if we are collecting authentic stories, real, true, loving, authentic stories, and that's what gets onto social media. That's what's on social media. And social media probably hates it. I don't know, right? And I talk about it's this monolith, but it kind of is. They're all architected the same way. Maybe we force it to be better. And it's just a reflection of who we are. And so, man, I got long, but I'm so passionate about that. It's the idea that, the profit-driven storytelling platforms, they're not storytelling platforms, but you know what I mean, like Twitter and Instagram. It's about interaction, engagement, and not authenticity, that's for sure. That manufactured authenticity.
If you've got an opportunity to just talk to people, ask them good questions, listen, be authentic yourself, and listen authentically to what they have to say. One part that strikes me about what you said earlier, you've said it a couple times, is that life isn't tidy. It's not a bunch of Star Wars stories where you know who the hero is and what happens at the end. And I'm sure that's true when you're collecting stories, both today with Memory Fox, but also throughout your life. That is there a tendency sometimes for us to try and get people to tell us the story in a tidy way?
Yeah, was that in a lot, right? Because I'm so glad you asked this. All right, so I'm going to try to tease this out here because this is something I think it ties back to what we just talked about. Stories, Star Wars stories are entertainment. They're entertainment, and if you're trying to tell Star Wars stories, that's entertainment. But real life is not entertainment. It just exists. It happens. It unfolds, right? And so on social media and like a lot of these things, it wants Star Wars stories because those are entertaining. But like I think, and I know I am not influenced by Star Wars stories, I want to see the ums and the ahs and the not the sadness, right? Or the glee, or the whatever it is, the joy. I want to see the human authenticity. That's what I donate for. I want to see the reality. And I think as the world changes, right? AI is going to eat the world, whether we like it or not, right? And so what is going to be more valuable than anything on the planet in about 9 years? Authenticity. And so if you have a story bank filled with authentic, real human stories, you'll be ready for it. Versus, I think there's going to be a large push in about 5 years for people to use AI to create stories.
It feels like
you're going to see it.
It feels like it
right, exactly.
So the AI stories, I wasn't going to ask you about AI at all, but you're right. This is almost a kind of a competition in our heads for where those stories are going to come from. And can we just put it in Chat GPT and we issue something out? How do you feel about the introduction of AI and the way people are using it in order to kind of fabricate this reality?
You can imagine what I think about. I come from a very humanistic tradition, right? I believe in like humans doing human things, getting out in nature, like living with getting some dirt under your feet and things like that, like spending time with your family out there. And like, there's a lot of good can come of technology. So like I thought about this. So my daughter spent the first month of her life in a children's hospital. And it was a very dramatic, obviously, moment in my life. And I was just mesmerized by the orchestra of technology in that room that kept her alive. So, and all of that was created by technology. 100 years ago, she would not have survived, right? And so you can't go throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, and just hate technology. You know what I mean? But AI is a whole different animal because it eliminates the humanistic tradition in a lot of ways and replaces it. And so, who knows the way it's going to go, right? I'm not such a doomer that I think, look, we've been around for a long time and people have been predicting our demise for a long time. And so is this just another thing or is this the thing? Who the heck knows, right? Certainly it's different, but is it different? That's even the smartest person in the world is struggling with it right now. Nobody knows which way technology is ever going to go. And and nothing is as inevitable as people think that it is. But to me, like, I'm going to keep dirt under my feet. I'm going to keep helping people tell real human, authentic stories. And that's just where I'm going to plant my flag. And and I think we all would do better if we did. And here's the thing, nonprofits have to. Like, I think they're going to try to get pulled into this world of AI and things like that. And they already are, right? And certainly there's a lot of ways. Donor management, maybe even some grant writing and things like that. Like, it can be really helpful and make things more accessible. But when it comes to human stories, there's no faking it. We're humans.
Right.
It's like teaching a bird to sing, right? The bird just knows how to sing. It doesn't go to school, learn how to sing. It just sings, right? We're humans. We tell stories. It's what we do.
Although we have to
Star Wars stories.
We have to remember how to listen to
ourselves.
Right.
Listen to me. I'm talking about myself. I came into this like kind of nervous to talk about myself, and here I'm just going because we're humans. Yeah. We love telling stories. We love being seen. People want to be seen. They want to be heard. And if you are a nonprofit and you are elevating people's voices, you can never go wrong. Never go wrong if you are elevating the voices of people in your community. So,
Chris, there's one thing that really strikes me about this is that, and it's not so much about AI, it's about technology and about what you do to get these authentic stories, and then the impact they have for the nonprofit world, the world of social good. And this is something I experienced just personally recently. I was looking for information about my dad. And there's no Wikipedia entry for my father. And he did some good work. But the reason I'm mentioning this is not because of my family. It's because of everybody's family. So in the case of the man you met there in Iraq, and he told you about the story of his street and why he still lives there and the people who came to visit, I suspect there's no Wikipedia entry on that man. So the only story that came out of it was because you stopped and talked with him, and then that story was shared with others. In a world where so much of AI is informed by what's recorded, actually the majority of people's stories probably aren't recorded unless we record them. So, you started Memory Fox, I think, listening to other stories. It was like stories of people who are older, who might encounter dementia. Is that right? I mean, so these stories are precious and fragile, and if they're not recorded, they're gone, right?
Yeah, that actually was the way we started it. So we originally, we built it as a way to interview pre-dementia elderly to get their life stories. And it would sort of be a guided tour. And so there's business ideas, and then there's the actual like bringing a business to market. And I was a little naive about how to bring that to market. And I didn't know anything, right? I was just an Army guy, right? I had no business experience at all. And I couldn't really figure out how to bring that to market. I still think it's a great idea, and I think someone should do it. And maybe some people are now, but yeah, like those are precious. I mean, they're infinitely precious, and that's got to be everybody's North Star. And we live in this world now where like, it's all about fame and like, and like standing out on TikTok and things like that. And if you don't exist. And I know like a lot of famous people have a lot of issues with this, is they feel like they have to be constantly out there. And if they take a year off, it's like they disappear and they could never get it back. I think that's probably a big challenge for them. But like normal people are just living their normal lives, telling stories around a dinner table, right? Or sitting next to each other at a bar stool. And there's no way to capture those. I mean, we had this idea that you could like slap a phone down and it would like record stories and then zip them up and turn them into like little mini stories. I actually, the first time we ever prototyped Memory Fox, I had a little voice recorder, and we went to my great aunt's retirement facility, and we just passed it around, and they all told stories. You can tell these stories had never really been told. And they all came from a different generation, right? That were more buttoned up. But man, you put that recorder in front of them, and all of a sudden they just light up and they're telling stories. But yeah, I mean, for a nonprofit, like they have, at the end of the day, they still have business, things that need to be done to grow revenue. You know what I mean? And technology does help that, right? They still need to do these tasks. Is to inspire donors to join their community, but also remain in their community. Keep, and make sure their board is informed of the stories being told so that they can make good decisions, et cetera, right? To build your community on Facebook and stuff like that. So you have to leverage the technology in a way, but the way we built this company is to do it in as much a humanistic way as possible, to put the storyteller at the forefront, to help guide them a little bit so that they can do it ethically. Because what do people used to do? Hire an agency, put people in front of a camera, put some makeup on them so that they look good on the camera and they'll tell the story, right? Cost $10,000, whatever, right? And then you have to pay to get it all edited and stuff like that. Whereas what we think about it is it's just raw, authentic content. Is like the ums and the ahs, because that to me is true authenticity, and that's truly respecting people's stories. When you dress up a story, you are not respecting the storyteller. You're changing the story. When you put makeup on them, you change the story. When you take a bunch of lights and put it on them, you change the story. It's like, what is it? I'm going to say this wrong and someone will hate this. I believe the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, right, is when you is the idea of like you, and it's been bastardized probably in a lot of different ways. So I'm going to mess this up. But the idea is like, you can't watch something and video something without affecting it.
Right.
Right. And so if you shove a camera in front of someone's face or you put a bunch of makeup, you know what I mean? Like you're changing
the story,
right? It's messy. It's gritty. You are a nonprofit that is doing the Lord's work, right? And so show the authenticity, right? Don't feel the need for these overproduced stories. Nobody wants to see it. Nobody wants to see it anymore, right? It's like the Kardashian. Remember the Kardashian Pepsi commercial where and everybody was so mad about it, right? Of course they were. Right? It's like that fake corporate authenticity that corporations have, and that's another thing about, oh man, I could just rant all day, right? You got me. It's very hard for nonprofits right now, right? Because they need to stand out on social media. And who are they fighting against for eyeballs? They're fighting against brands. And what brands have done is they've hijacked authenticity. And they have this like faux authenticity that is product centered and is money centered, right, to get people to buy products. And so it's the opposite, the antithesis of authenticity, but they're so good at it, right? So, but what a nonprofits end up trying to chase that. They try to chase these brands and try to look like them, when what they need to be doing is just showing a quick snippet of their food bank, of people loading boxes, of right? A volunteer just telling a quick story about how beautiful the day was and how inspired they were to talk to people, or like a constituent with their daughter at a camp, right? Like ums and ahs and the whole deal, right? Don't try to be like these big brands. Don't fight them just because the algorithm wants that. Flip the model. Go authentic. Go completely opposite and dedicate yourself to authentic video. And the algorithm likes that too. It's just people are afraid of it because they measure themselves on these impossible standards, marketing budgets in the millions, that spend all their money trying to look like they don't have a marketing budget.
So let me ask you about this. Where it's going, because as you just said, if it's a battle for authenticity, although albeit a lot of that's faux authenticity, like you said, right? The Pepsi commercial, at the same time, everybody's hurtling forward as fast as they can, especially now because we've seen this decline in the percentage of people who give to charity, to traditional charity anyway. And that's, again, happened this year, as well as the past 20 years. Every single year we see a decline. So people are obviously hungry for real life, just like you are and I am. So where's this going? How do we make sure that the real stories also get in front of people so they can respond to them in a way that makes sense for them, either as donors or volunteers or active participants in some way? How do we get the stories you're talking about in front of people? How do we make sure that the equivalent of you walking up to that man in Iraq happens for a person sitting in their living room in Albuquerque to hear a story about a food bank?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big question. And I think it's an uphill battle. Right. And I think you just touched on something, is that individual donation. And there's a lot of reasons that could be why. I think there's a lot of speculation as to why people are in a particularly dour mood these days. And I think a lot of that is because of social media and because of this like new world that we live in, where there's fake authenticity. And it's just people, and not to everything goes back to Bruce Springsteen for me. I'm such a big Bruce Springsteen fan, but like people want a reason to believe. People want a reason to believe in each other and believe in themselves and believe that they can be a part of something. And I think, you look at politics, right? And you look at all these, and of course that's a big broad thing, right? Mm-hmm. But like people have used authenticity and used these platforms to generate outrage, which generates dollars, which generates momentum and for political causes and things like that. And they have to do it, right? It's their job. That's how you grow. But like, if you're capturing those authentic stories, but you can still use the same platforms, but dedicate yourself to authenticity, it will stand out. People will see it. People will notice the authenticity because, like you know what? It's kind of like what I said earlier. Is like if you ask somebody for a story and you don't come from a place of love and authenticity and empathy, people will spot you a mile away. Humans can spot a fake a mile away. And people think AI is going to make that difficult, but I think it's going to be harder than people think as people are more clever. And so if you dedicate yourself to authenticity and sharing just interesting stories, and it could be snippets that tell a greater story, and get that on social media, get that directly through your email lists, build those email lists that are direct to your people, that don't go through a medium that's algorithm driven. Come up with clever ways to deliver those stories. I mean, that's one of the things that we think a lot about is like, how do we get these stories directly to the people that need to hear these stories without going through the intermediate of social media, which is profit algorithm driven. And all that is to say, I don't have a great answer. You know what I mean? I think you just have to focus on North Stars, like authenticity, and it will play out. It just happens organically as people crave authenticity these days. And if you dedicate yourself to that as true love and empathy and authenticity, you can't go wrong. Yeah, I think you just have to have these like spiritual North Stars in how you choose to tell the stories about your organization. And I think that stands out. If you're just showing videos of the executive director talking for 5 minutes, and then maybe a couple like glossy videos of people talking about how great the nonprofit is, like everybody's seen that before. You know what I mean? Like that's Pepsi. That's Pepsi. But if you show a video of like, heck, it could be people standing in line. It could be anything, right? It tells a story. People standing in line could be a great story, right? Look how many people are here at this food bank. You know what I mean? They wave. Like that tells a story. Like that is a story. A picture is 1,000 words. And people think that's not a Star Wars. That's a Bruce Springsteen story. People standing in a line is a Bruce Springsteen. So he'd write a whole song about it.
What's your favorite Springsteen song?
Oh, it's Hungry Heart. Really? As big and wild, because I used to not like his like bigger songs.
Yeah.
When I was younger, I thought they were kind of corny. But as I get older, right, everybody does have a hungry heart. Like it could be anybody. And what a beautiful story to tell is like the idea that it doesn't matter, you're black, white, anybody, right? That your gender doesn't matter. Like everybody just wants to be loved and everybody wants to be heard. Everybody has a hungry heart. And it's like, you keep that as your North Star as a nonprofit, like, and tell stories about that. Like, that's what people want.
Yeah. That's
what people want is they want that authenticity that shows that side of people.
So what do you still have?
That's not it, right? You look on social media, I could pop up Twitter right now and I would see 100 angry stories from people who want to sow discontent. And like, that's not what nonprofits do. Like they're doing the Lord's work of bringing people together in love and connection. And like, you've chosen to dedicate your life to giving and love and things like that versus profit driven, which people, you find your North Star, you do what you got to do to survive. But what a privilege, right? To work in nonprofits. Every day I wake up and I'm so glad. Could have go worked at a bank or I could have done whatever, but here we are, right? Like this is it. This is where real human love happens.
So this is 3 years for you with this particular incarnation of your life, but always stories are a piece of your life. Clearly, what are you still hungry for? What do you imagine this takes you?
I will tell you that, like, I am obsessed with how many cool things that we could build. Like, it's so cool working in technology and like, and just building the team. Like, I never thought that I would ever have as good of a job as when I was a company commander in the Army, where like you have the power to do cool stuff, get the people in the right places to do the right things, and like build culture and all these amazing things, work with just such awesome people. I never thought I would get that, but here I am. And like, so like, to me, it's about building a great team of loving people who work together, who have great North Stars. I keep using that word, but I love it. Like these great North Stars of like love and giving and empathy and teamwork and helping, right? And that informs the technology. And there's just so much cool stuff you can build when you're empathetic. A lot of technology is rent seeking. It's like kids in Silicon Valley who went to Stanford. And this is the type of stuff that gets me in trouble, but I don't care. Who have a new way to take 5% of a market and then grow, scale that. And then now they take 5% of a market segment, that money, and then it goes to a bunch of rich people. You know what I mean? Like that's a lot of what it is. But what a privilege to work in the nonprofit space where that's not how this works. You can't get away with that stuff. You can't even get those investors because they don't want to invest in the nonprofit space. It's so hard to raise money in the nonprofit space because venture capitalists are like, not a chance. And so the technology, you have to build it organically through direct customer engagement and like having a really sharp team that knows how to prioritize features. And so you're always robbing Peter to pay Paul to like build this company piece by piece. But what an exhilarating thing. What an honor to build awesome software for awesome organizations that are doing beautiful work. I mean, it's a privilege, right, to continue a life of service in a way that I never, when I got out of the Army, the first thing I did, I started plowing driveways in the snow in Buffalo and shoveling because I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And so what a privilege.
The Philanthropy Masterminds podcast is underwritten by DonorSearch, the world leader in donor intelligence solutions. Our producer is Jack Frost. Our theme music is Be My Remedy, composed and performed by House of Stay. You can subscribe to the Philanthropy Masterminds podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find blogs, webcasts, and CFRE accredited webinars with our featured masterminds at DonorSearch.net or check the show notes and descriptions.